Hi everyone, I'm Mikali Cosplay, and today I will be taking you along to a journey to make a dress for the Bridgerton Candlelight Orchestra. I had to think about the word for a second. So, what this video entails is basically a sew-along as well as a review in the end about this pattern that I bought, and now to the pattern. The pattern I bought is from Burda, and it's this Regency kind of dress, simply because I don't have anything fancy to wear, and I thought if I'm going to sew something, I am going all out with it, obviously. So, my credentials to do this kind of review and sew along with it is simply I've been a professional tailor and seamstress for around 7 years, and I've also gotten a bachelor's degree in fashion design and technology. So I do know how to make patterns. I've also learned how to make these commercial ones in the different sizes with the grading. But the orchestra is in like a week, and I didn't really have time besides my actual work to sit down and make a pattern for it. So I'm going to make this pattern from Burda, and I'm going to follow the instructions completely, and in the end I'm just going to say what I would have done different, what I think is really good, what I like, what I didn't like, and if overall I think it's worth buying instead of trying to make your own. So, for the materials, Burda has these nice little overviews of what you need for the dress, and I've had this blue satin fabric laying around in my stash for almost 10 years now, because I never really had anything fancy enough to make with it, and now I do. I've also bought this elastic. It's the size and length that the pattern tells me to, so we should be all set and good to go to get started. So right off the bat, what I've noticed is we have a lot of paper, a lot of different things. We are doing dress B, so they always tell you this is dress B, this is dress A. We are going to do the B, so we can simply yeet. We can simply yeet away the patterns that we don't need. I didn't throw it somewhere and throw something on the floor. No, I would never do that. Anyway, we have the instructions. I think we have 2 instructions depending on language. Also to note, this pattern does have seam allowance, which is written here. Again, it's written in German, so if you don't speak German, you're not going to understand it, but yes, it does have seam allowance. Which is actually something I hate in patterns, because I'm very fixated on the ways that we learn to make seam allowances, but I'm going to follow it. It's probably going to be fine either way. So this is the pattern. As you can see, it's not that many pieces. But what's really nice is we have the little sizing chart up there, and we also have a constant reminder on how much seam allowance there is. Now what I do appreciate is that they use 1.5 centimeter seam allowance instead of just 1. It kind of leaves just something in case anything goes wrong, and it's just easier to work with. By the way, I was wrong to yeet one of the pattern pieces away, because apparently pattern B for the dress is laid scattered through 3 pieces of paper. So I had to bring that back, and I'm now going to cut the paper. So, after cutting everything out, we notice that there's this extension piece that tells me to tape together. So, we are going to do that. Although, see, the thing is, I am very, very tiny. So, I actually don't think I need this additional piece of extension. But we're going to do it. And if I am going to shorten this dress this amount, I am going to lose it. So here in the preparing thing, it obviously tells us to cut it out, the pieces required, and then it also tells us about these extensions that I mentioned, about taping these together before cutting out the fabric. So we can start on the back side once we get this cut out. This is a super great pose to make videos. So, here is the fabric and the pattern flat down on my floor. Obviously the fabric is way too big for my table, so I'm going to have to cut this on the floor down here. I did flip around one of the patterns so that the fold is on the same side. And I also flipped this upside down so that the fabric and the shimmer of the satin flows in the same direction everywhere. Because on the pattern lay down preview suggestion, it actually was turned upside down, and I really didn't like that because I wanted the satin to shimmer the same way. If you have a fabric with a pattern or like flowers or something like that, you would also need to lay it down like this so that the flowers and the pattern look the same everywhere and it's not like flipped around. Thing we have to do before we can start sewing, and that is get these little markings here over onto the fabric. Now there's a lot of different ways to do that. You can make a little cut with the scissors, you can use paper, or you can do what I like to do, and that is use a pin. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to take the pin here and I'm going to make it like this, and for the back side I am also threading in a pin. Now I can take this out and just do it very gently on one part, and then I have a pin here and I have a pin here, and I can just fold the fabric open if it lets me, and I have both sides marked with this pin. So the pattern told us to only pin and sew one side seam, so here's my pin side seam, just one of them. The other stays open. And now we are going to sew that. So, I did say I wasn't going to stray too far from the pattern and the description, but they want me to use bias binding for the next step, and I don't have any at home, and I don't want to run to the store just for a piece of bias binding, and I am just going to make strips on my own. Now the reason they are using bias binding is because you can shape it easier, and it already has this tunnel shape where you can just stitch the top and the bottom. However, I can just make a straight little ribbon with like that and then sew it on. And the idea, I think it's actually illustrated quite nicely. So you have this one seam that's closed and then you just sew on the bias tape top and bottom, and then you have this little tunnel where you can thread the elastic in. So I am just going to cut some stripes out of the leftover fabric from this one and going to use that. But of course bias tape, pre-made bias tape would be a lot easier and quicker, but we can do that ourselves, no biggie. Now for the next step, it tells us to get started with the sleeve now that we've finished the base of the dress. So the first thing we want to do is also sew in this little bias tape like we did here, to then thread in the elastic for the sleeve. So we have this elastic here that we can later thread in. And here on the sleeves, what we're actually doing is we make the tunnel all the way to the end. Which, again, you can see here on the picture, you're supposed to leave a little space. And here it's actually really just up to the end. So, the next thing we're going to do is sew this tunnel on both sleeves, and then we can already thread in the elastic. The next step would be making this seam like this with the zigzag stitch, like folding in and then zigzagging it. I did do a video before on how to do that with like sheer and very soft fabric. I am going to link it somewhere. But I'm not going to do this on this fabric because I feel like this is probably too thick for that and too flimsy. I don't know. I just think I am just going to overlock the hem allowance and then fold it in and sew over it instead of doing this very soft, thin little zigzag seam hem, whatever. So the next step is measuring out your upper arm for the elastic. It did tell me for the smallest size it should be around 28 centimeters, but I have very thin little arms, so I'm going to measure this out, pin it, and then try it on if it's fine or if I need to make it tighter. So here we have our little circle thingy, and I'm really just going to put it up here, and I think it can get a little tighter. So now we're going to thread in the elastic, and what I like to do is use a safety needle like this and just thread it in like so, and then I can just push this in here and step by step grab the fabric, kind of scrunch it up, and then just, now that we have our elastic inside and fixated, so I did a few stitches left and right to fixate it, we are going to close the side seam. So we're going to put right on the right side like this, and then we're going to sew this seam right here. Now the side seams are closed and I've already went and serged them. I've also made the hem simply serged and then stitched over it once. And now that our puffy sleeves are done, we can go ahead and put them inside the armhole of the dress. So next up, we are also going to make a bias tape binding strip here right up at the neckline. It does tell me to place it 2.5 centimeters down from the neckline, so I'm going to use my chalk and mark these 2.5 centimeters, and then I'm going to make the tunnel like I did here and like I did here. So the next step, and almost the last one, is doing the last elastics. So we've sewn in the little tunnel here at the top of the dress, and now we can put in the elastic on there, and you can also fasten the elastic here under the bust. So we did try it on, and I still think that the elastic can be tightened just a notch. So we are going to just pull it out a little bit more and then sew it. And the way you want to sew elastic so that it's the flattest it can be is you take one piece and you lay the other on top like this. So now we are going to make the bow, or rather the ribbon for the bow in the front. Now we have this long strip we've cut out. I've actually cut it out double instead of just once, but that's not like bad or anything. You just have one left over, or maybe if it's too short and I want the bow to be longer, I can use both, who knows. So we're going to simply put right and right side together and then sew along here, and then we're going to flip it inside out. So we have the strip, right? We have also cut away some of the excess seam allowance, and now we have this cone shape I was talking about. So I'm using this wool needle. They did say I should also use a safety pin, but I think it's just easier to do it with the wool needle. So the thread we left in the start we're going to put on here. And then we're going to thread that in here, and then we're just gonna start pulling the needle through, and then we can kind of try to flip this on the end here, and then really just go step by step. And now to our review time. So first off, I'd like to start with the things I really liked. First of all, the pattern is really affordable compared to other pattern designs and pattern makers. The Burda pattern was the cheapest one, so my cause was a lot more expensive. So I really like that, especially for a quick project like this. The overall cut I really liked. It is just as the picture advertised, so no false advertising. I also really like the gathering amount. It doesn't feel like it's too much, but it also doesn't look flat, and I think this will work on a lot of different body types due to that, so I really like this. I also gotta say, I really liked the guide, so I thought the step-by-step was really cohesive, and the illustrations were very helpful. There was basically a illustration or multiple per step, so that was really good. Now, to the things that I would change, those aren't necessarily things that I didn't like personally, like, for example, I don't like the seam allowance included, but that's a different thing, we can keep that, I don't mind. But things that changed for everyone is keeping the pattern together. So there was this extension piece that I've talked about already, that we had to add, and I know, for example, a friend of mine actually also worked with this pattern and didn't realize there was a extension piece to add. Sure, it has like one sentence in the description, but if you're confident enough with sewing that you don't follow the description, but only use the pattern as a base, this can be forgotten quite easily, and it's not big enough that you would see it on first glance. So the extension is like 10 centimeters, and if you have to split the pattern, make it more obvious. Make the extension piece so much bigger that you see it at first glance, or mark it higher, or again, just keep the entire skirt as one piece. It might not have paper big enough, but I think this extension is just silly, I think. The next thing I would change is the bias binding under the bust. Now, this step was that we sew one side seam, then make the bias binding, and then sew the other. And it bothers me a lot is that on one side, you can actually see that the elastic and the bias binding is going over the entire thing, and on the other that it's kind of loose. I really think you can see which side seam is smooth and one which kind of looks a little bit weird on the side, and I just don't like that. I know it might be easier to make this open, like sew on the bias binding open surely is easier because everything lays flat. But if you just do it in the finished circle, it's gonna look so much smoother. And yeah, I would change that step to sewing both side seams first and then doing the bias binding. And the last thing I would change, and that has to do with the grading for the sizing, is add more height for bigger chests. Now, usually the bigger the size and the bigger the chest measurement, the more volume you need in the chest area. Now, I don't have a huge chest, but I also made the neckline seam allowance less. So I didn't fold over 1.5 centimeters, I folded over 7 millimeters, half of that. And I think in some angles, it actually looks like the neckline is pretty deep. And so I think adding like few more centimeters in height over the chest would help a lot, especially in the bigger sizes, bigger than the 38, like maybe again 40, 42. Just add more centimeters to help going over the rounded chest. Because, you know, the chests do get pretty big. Now, all those things considered, I think my overall score for this pattern stays at a 4.5 out of 5. It's just, like, there are a few things I would change, especially in the bigger sizes. But it's still a really good pattern for the fact that it's pretty cheap. And also, it is very beginner friendly. I think overall, it is almost perfect, but there are a few steps I think could be made. And with that, I'm already done with the sew-along/review of the Burda Regency dress. And I will see you another time. Bye bye!